Hello, everyone. This is Sergio Morero. We're here at another episode of RBL1 Live. Today, we're lucky enough to have two guests, not just one, to talk about Latina venture students, Ashley Aydin, and then also Joanna Lichter Cohen. Thank you both for joining us today. Before we kick it off, if we could share a little bit about their backgrounds. I think between both of them, they touch every venture network that exists. So all stars and hustlers here today to talk about what they're doing. But we'll start with Joanna. She a graduate of Duke University, currently at MIT Sloan at the MBA School of Management, worked at VIA, also an associate or associated with Pair VC, S2G Ventures, Rough Draft Ventures, and Founder Collective. Ashley is a graduate of Brown University, also at MIT, previously of Morgan Stanley, and also Dorm Room Fund, Vamos Ventures, Brand Foundry Ventures, and Founders Factory. So excited to speak with both of you today.
Thank you for having us.
Of course. So I'm going to turn it over to you. And if you could share with the audience your collective endeavor, the newest endeavor, Latina Venture Students, if you can share with them what is Latina Venture Students.
Absolutely. Latina Venture Students was a long time coming. I think Joanna and I didn't even know what venture capital was, being undergrads or high school students, or we knew what venture capital was coming into our MBA program, but like, what does it really take? How do investors think about companies? And just based on sort of our upbringings, we didn't really see a lot of Latinas around the table in this industry. And so we really wanted to create a community of Latina students where we think there's the most gap in sort of education, mentorship, and where, women are really trying to break in and break through into this crazy world, fun world that is venture capital. And so we said to ourselves, let's create this community focused on education, mentorship, apprenticeship, network, just supporting one another in breaking into the industry and even learning about it and meeting amazing founders. So our programming is going to include a lot of different things. We're going to have founder firesides where we feature Latina founders from across the country focused on their entrepreneurial journeys, their hustle, what it really takes, and really, how do investors provide value add? Everyone talks about, we're a value add investor, we're a value add investor. It's not just capital, it's making introductions, it's talking about tech know-how, it's a bunch of other things. So for our members, how can you truly be a value add to these founders and listen to their stories and hear their concerns, their milestones and that journey? We're also thinking about putting on, and we have our first one actually coming up in a few months, VC one-on-one sessions. Very intimate setting where anything's fair game for some of the investors from top funds coming in. We have Alfred Lin of Sequoia, for example, doing a session where our community members can really ask all the unsexy questions, if you will, of venture capital. What it really takes to source a company. What does it take to fundraise? It's such a roller coaster ride. And so again, anything's fair game in those sessions. And then finally, we're going to have networking events where the community members are just going to get to know each other's backgrounds, aspirations, dreams, how we could support one another. We actually just had our kickoff and meet and greet yesterday, and it was such a fun night. There were so many amazing stories about how Latina venture students would be such a value add to a lot of these women. And it just meant the world to us. And I think, finally, what we're working on in the background, other than those three threads, is really creating sort of mentorship. So we're starting to partner with some venture funds on, maybe pairing one or two Latinas in our community up with them for internship opportunities, fellowships, and the like. So that's really what Latina Venture Students is all about. I think we're sort of a startup in and of itself, but we're excited to be the go-to community for Latina students.
Amazing. Joanna, do you want to, anything to add?
My amazing colleague has covered it for sure. But I think really just we're super excited to help the next generation of Latinas fully break into venture, and the more resources that we can provide and create that talent pipeline, the better. I think both of us like fundamentally believe there isn't a pipeline problem, right? It's a networks problem. And I think the more that we can like solve that issue, the better for us. So we're super pumped to be starting this today.
Amazing. Joanna, I'll start with you since Ashley started before. Can you share a little bit about your story? How did you end up? You focused your BA on international comparative studies and Spanish. How did you go from there to break into the startup world and then end up being in venture capital?
Yeah, so it's definitely not a straight line journey. And so I grew up in Miami. My mom is Cuban, my dad's American. Really just always was, constantly speaking Spanish, and had friends from like every country, just being in Miami, and was always very much like solidly in the culture. And I knew that for undergrad, wanted to do something different, went to Duke. And then when I got there, just, like you said, did international studies, also double majored in Spanish, wanted to formalize like a lot of my broken Cuban Spanish, which was, awesome. And I'm glad I did that. And really after school, I was looking for a place that had a really strong entrepreneurial culture where I'd have the chance to work in Latin America, which was always a dream of mine. And so ended up working for Restaurant Brands International, running marketing for 10 countries down there. Loved it, had an awesome experience. And then after 2 years in that role, just became more and more interested in the world of tech, wanted to be at a place where I could have a bigger impact. And so ended up joining a really small startup in the enterprise social space. Was there for about a year. We raised a few million in seed funding. And that was really like my first exposure to anything about, equity or options and investors. And it was just something that was absolutely fascinating to me. That startup, like many others, unfortunately didn't make it, but had the opportunity to join another startup called Via, which is now a $2 billion company in the mobility space. And, there I did everything from strategy and operations to marketing, finance, like really, you name it. Was there for 3 years and loved it. And, I think similarly, like the longer that I worked on the startup side, the more that I became interested in the world of venture, and basically decided to apply to business school to really pursue that goal. I looked at a lot of the backgrounds of successful investors, and most of them had gone down the MBA path. And so I thought it'd be the best way to get there. And basically started networking and hustling and chat, like tons of cold LinkedIn emails about like trying to really just like get my foot in the door somehow, and ended up getting an internship at S2G. So like that was my foray into venture, loved it. And then really, since starting at MIT, I've had the opportunity to work at a few different funds, like you mentioned, and have been working with the team at Founder Collective over the past year on early stage investing. And it's been an unbelievable opportunity, have really gotten to go deep on lots of different sectors. And, Ashley and I in our class at MIT are the only two women, not just Latina women, who are pursuing VC full time, and which is just a shocking stat in itself. And so we're super excited to be launching this, and it's very much a passion project of ours.
Amazing. And then Ashley focused on bachelor coming from Brown, and then making your way into the equity capital market space at Morgan Stanley. What inspired the switch?
Yeah, absolutely. Brown's definitely a quirky place. So I owe most of my success to the teachings of the Brown drum circles. But was very involved in the entrepreneurship ecosystem at Brown. That was probably my first exposure to the startup and venture world, working on the Brown entrepreneurship program, Brown Venture Labs, which was the first student fund out of it. Sold my soul to finance right after undergrad because, I came from, my father is an immigrant of Turkey. My mom's Puerto Rican, girl from Brooklyn. I was the first person in my family to sort of attend college and now, hopefully graduate from MIT's MBA program. And I thought to myself, well, finance sounds, based on some conversations with my mentors and folks around me, like it would provide me with a really good skill set to go off and do whatever I wanted to. And so joined the equities desk, covering the consumer space Was at the tail end of the Facebook IPO, and that was really fun, but really learn fundamentally, like, what do these management teams and companies really care about? How do they sell to investors? What are sort of their drivers behind their stories? And then, really missed the startup space after 2 years at Morgan Stanley, and cold emailed Olga Vidasheva, who's the CEO of Shoptiques.com, which came out of YC. It's an e-commerce startup, basically an Etsy for boutiques. And said, hey, I want to work for you. I saw you're on Forbes 30 under 30. I know you'll probably be hard to work for, but I want to do a complete 180 and learn everything that there is to learn about being at an early stage startup. That was one of the best decisions I ever made in my career. I learned the ugly, the really good, how to inspire teams, how to pitch to investors, how to literally be on the phones selling to customers, which I was hung up on multiple times, but just that grit and hustle was something I really learned. And then for the time right before business school, ended up going back into the corporate space, doing strategy and corp dev at a bunch of different retailers, Saks Fifth Avenue, Estee Lauder, focused a lot on digital and omni-channel initiatives, as well as fun things like virtual beauty and 3D printing. Came to Sloan to explore actually entrepreneurship. And, once my idea wasn't really validated, I was like, okay, crap, like, let me go try to go into the venture space, because I thought it was such a wonderful combination of thematic thinking, quantitative, qualitative, just being a very people-oriented business. And, being a Latina, I didn't really see enough diversity in the space. I still don't see enough diversity in the space, and I wanted to do something about that. And so jumped around to a bunch of different funds. Brand Foundry focus on consumer, Vamos focus on that impact and diversity initiative, and then Founders Factory, which is focused on consumer health and mission-driven companies, trying to improve health outcomes with our largest corporate partner, J&J. And absolutely love this world that is early stage investing and just working with really, really smart people all day.
Amazing. So for both of you, let's go. Before we dive in a little further, because we could talk about different aspects, if you can talk about a little bit of what you've done with Latina venture students. I know you've kind of just started off, and what like where do you want to take it? We'll start there.
Joanna, do you want to take this?
Sure. So, I think fundamentally, like Ashley mentioned, we have three main pillars, right? So the first is education, the second is mentorship, and then the first is really networking and events. So I think, first it's really about equipping students with the right resources so they're up to speed. This is everything from like what's VC versus PE, how do you get into VC? Like what are the typical pathways? What are the steps that you need to take now to really set yourself up for success in the future? I think second one in terms of mentorship. So we've had such an outpouring of support from the community already. Many different, Latino investors have reached out and said, how can I help? How can I be part of this community? How do we make sure that this doesn't end when you two graduate? And I think a big part of that is mentorship. And so we're going to pair our Latinas with people who are active in the industry and hopefully get them, a front seat into what it's like to be a GP at a fund. And then the last thing is really networking and events. So like Ashley mentioned, we're bringing in a lot of speakers, a lot of VCs, a lot of founders, so they can start building their networks, and so they can start sourcing deals and just really have, a front seat. And I think like it's very much still a work in progress. Like we're going to learn from our students and this first cohort as we go. And so hopefully that, for the years to come, this can continue to be a really awesome group that, goes on forever.
Amazing. For each of you, can you share, deviating from LVS, do you have a particular industry or area of focus that you're excited about, and why?
Yeah, I definitely have worked on many deals in sort of the women's health space that touches women over 40, that touches allergy to immuno, that touches digestion, active aging. And so love seeing deals there. I think it sort of hits on, again, like expanding sort of healthcare access as well as a lot of these problems that have been overlooked for a very long time, just given the dynamics of the venture capital community being mostly male and white. And so now is sort of a time, I think, to start focusing on these companies finally, and that's sort of a passion area of mine, as well as, on the Vamos venture side in particular, really trying to find those diverse founders. And diversity means a lot of different things: Hispanic, Black, disabled, veteran, and sort of other different threads, but I'm really trying to find those types of founders and really putting sort of money where our mouths are. I think a lot of times in the industry, you hear a lot of, or there's a lot of lip service. And then, I think it's reassuring to be at a fund or work closely with a fund that is actually putting that money towards these mission-driven and diverse founded companies.
How about you, Joanna?
Yeah, I mean, I think similar to Ashley, also very excited about women's healthcare. We've talked a lot about it, shared many deals in the space. I think it's certainly a space that we're both super passionate about. I think beyond that, I think two spaces that I've been recently digging into are the creator economy and then fintech. So on the creator economy side, I think it's super exciting that you can really become an entrepreneur and get set up in a matter of minutes these days. Like there's more and more like Shopify for Instagram influencers and just a plethora of new tools that are really enabling people to monetize themselves. And to me, that's incredibly exciting. And then kind of, related, I would say, is the fintech space. I think that we're seeing more and more companies that are finally creating access for underbanked and unbanked populations, making lending easier, making access to credit easier, making things like getting insurance easier. And so to me, when you have technology that fundamentally democratizes access and meets the consumer where they are in this really modern way is really exciting. So those are two spaces that I'm definitely digging into.
If you were, I have to say, so I've spoken to startups, thousands of founders at this point. You guys definitely have the founder gene. If you were to start your next startup, doesn't have to be together. We'll ask them separately. What would you start and why? Let's go there. Ashley, your start. What would the product be? What would the customer be?
I'm really fascinated. I think this goes into sort of like, it still plays on the consumer healthcare theme. I'm really fascinated by the spirituality and faith space and how that affects mental health. I think there's a lot of opportunity. And I know there's like this might be a pretty contrarian view, but Gen Z is one of the, I think, least religious generations. And I think there might be sort of,
it's like least religious, but faith, but I actually have this conversation quite a bit, talk about what's disrupted church, right? Exactly. And what is it? Everybody's like, oh, now I have to have a meditation app. I was like, well, once a week people went to meditate for an hour together in church, and they had community where they dated, and they got they got business connections, like to work at a VC, right? And all those things. So it's really interesting now that that's not a center. Like, what are all the little things that are taking its place? But anyway, that's a longer.
No, I was going to say that like dovetails right into like what I was going to say. It's like, how can folks, and this, by the way, is coming from more of my personal journey as well. I feel like as I'm getting into older age, I am like more spiritually curious. I am curious about faith, and I'm thinking, well, other people are probably experiencing the same thing as I am. And so how to reconnect with like certain values in ways that maybe, a more traditional view of faith like doesn't offer this younger generation. And so what I would do is like, one, try to think about that problem, and two, like try to come up with maybe, if it works out, sort of a digitally like native sort of programming around, again, that intersection of faith, spirituality, and mental health. Stay tuned.
Love it. Joanna, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think kind of dovetailing off this theme of fintech, one thing that I've noticed more and more is there's such a gap in investing between men and women. And it's something that I'm really passionate about fixing. So like there have been platforms like Robinhood, which have, dramatically increased access to retail investors. And so you can invest in any sort of, public equity at this point. But I think there's still this fundamental gap. And, in fact, I was talking to a founder in the space, and she said, even when you try to acquire women through digital advertising, it's incredibly expensive because they just don't convert. And so most of these platforms just end up targeting men because it's cheaper and they're better customers. So I'm really passionate about finding a solution and, about fixing that. And so maybe one day it's a thread that I'll continue on.
Love it. Love it. And then also check out, I would say, FemTech Focus. We had the founder of FemTech Focus come on. If you're interested in women's, like specifically women's health and leaders in that space, they're rocking it as well. But to go like to take a step back and what you guys are doing or ladies are doing is fantastic in terms of elevating diversity in the venture capital space. Can you talk about from all that you've seen, right? You're taking part in these different programs. What more needs to happen to better support investors and founders that are underrepresented?
I think it is, to me at least, and Joanna might have a different perspective, I think it is sort of that education component. It is how do you, on the founder side, for example, how do you sort of carry out a successful fundraise? Like, what is fundraising? What sort of processes and steps you need in place? How do you create sort of an investor list? And how do you sort of prioritize that investor list? How do you even send like an outbound email to an investor? How do you storytell? I think storytelling in this industry is a huge component. And some founders just raise a bunch of money on storytelling alone. And so I think like that education component on the founder side. I think on the investor side, I mean, we've even gotten feedback from our community, like, this one amazing Latina in our community said she's the daughter of immigrants. She often found herself being like one of the only Latinas in the room just for anything. And I think what we really want to do, and I know we mentioned this before at Latina Venture Students, is really go sort of bare bones and say, like, this is what VC is. This is sort of how you get in. By the way, with all of that, we're going to expand your network by connecting you to folks at all these different events. And we're going to sort of be here to answer any of your questions, sort of like a buddy to buddy system of how do I even, even on the outbound emails for trying to find an investing job, right? Like, how do I approach sending that cold email to a top investor? It isn't just like, hey, I want a job. It's, hey, I'm really interested in the space, and here are some interesting companies that I just want to talk to you about based on something that you focus on as well. And that's, I think, how we are sort of both that education and again, that mentorship or apprenticeship component is how we, hopefully get more folks that look different in this industry in.
I would also turn it over to you and ask about almost net new. I agree that that there needs to be more representation among the jobs that are there, right? But when you do a little bit of the math, there's the same number of positions in venture capital as there are like professional athletes, right? Like, it's just such a competitive space of the competitive spaces. I can even speak to RBL1. We posted an analyst position, had an analyst come on. We got 1,000 applications. It was just insane. Like, for one role that we left open for like a week. Like, it was just so what can we do at a like higher octave, right? To just like again, needs to be more education around it to diversify some of those, but how do we grow the pie in this space? If either of you have answers around that, really curious.
I think it's a really good question, and one that I certainly don't have all the answers to. But what I do think is interesting, and where there's more opportunities is like more in that bridge between startups and investors, right? Like, I think having startup experience is super valuable as an investor. Like, it gives you credibility. You can really empathize. You know what they're going through. And so I think that if there's a way to create like more of a natural pipeline instead of having to hustle and then find a creative way to get in touch with the investor and try all these different crazy things and apply to a million jobs. Like, if there was more of that natural funnel where hey, you have your top, employees at a startup, and then there's kind of this natural progression to becoming an investor, maybe that's a way of semi expanding the pie. I also think we are kind of in this new inflection point where there's lots of different kinds of funds that are starting up, right? So there's rolling funds, which really only came around in the past year. We're seeing more and more solo GPs invest. And so I think there are new investment vehicles coming on board, and I think they are democratizing access, but it'll take time. And if you think about venture as an industry, it's really only been around for I don't know, 20 years in its current form, like, yeah, you can roll back the clock a little bit more, but like really since like .com boom is kind of like that modern era of VC. And so it's still a really new industry. And I think that it remains to be seen how the professions evolve in the next, 10, 20 years or so.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. The most of the innovation that's happened has happened in the before the .com boom. It would probably say the 60s and 70s is like the earliest versions, but still the same thing, like capital for small portions of equity and early stage venture. And then now you have, along with what you had mentioned in terms of rolling funds, the crowdfunding, that's happening, and then many more syndications. Even though AngelList has been around, it's just increasing the speed. So yes, there hasn't been as much innovation in the venture space, as ironic as that is. So I'm curious to see where it takes us. Can you share more about not only LVS, but what's your vision in terms of the role that, let's say, all race should play, and Black VC, Latinx VC? How do you think these groups should work together? Should they work together? If you can share some of that vision for you all. I know I asked you like 3 questions, which I shouldn't do, but turn it over to you.
Yeah, I'll try to answer this. Then Joanna, please chime in. But we are definitely going to partner with all the organizations. We're so supportive of their missions. They're very adjacent to what we're trying to do. We actually co-hosted an event with VC Familia and Latinx MBA. That was a great event on VC recruiting. And so we're going to do more of that. But I think where LVS sort of stands is where by students for students, and that's where we see sort of the gap. A lot of the other organizations are, again, amazing organizations, but focus more on folks who are already in the industry, have already broken into the industry. And we're really trying to focus on the folks that are sort of about to be or are trying to be. And so there's still a lot of conversations about co-hosting events, partnering. We've also got a lot of amazing outreach from different funds, both from the mentorship perspective, as well as sponsorships perspective. So there's a lot of amazing things in sort of the pipeline, and we're all going to be supportive of each other, because I think all of us have the mission of, again, diversifying this ecosystem even more.
Joanna, what anything to add?
No, I think that was like really sums it up very well. I think like where the level of organizations that have come up in recent years to support investors and founders, I think is amazing, right? Like I think it's great, all of the momentum, especially over the summer, right, that was built particularly for the Black community. And I think that now, like we're at a really good inflection point for underrepresented people, for women, for kind of all these different stakeholders to really get a seat at the table. And so we're just excited to be part of the ecosystem and just go a little earlier than I think where most of our peers are.
Amazing. So no, thank you for sharing a little bit of how it fits into the ecosystem. So thank you both very much for sharing about your journeys and LVS. The link to the organization post announcing the start of LVS is in the live stream notes. And do you all want to share a little bit about what's coming next and how they can find you?
Yeah, we have attached to that Medium post is a link to our intake form. So any Latinas who are students, undergrad, grad, we're also accepting of high school students who are interested in venture, to know about venture. Just please apply to that form, and we'll sort of bring you into our community through email, through Slack. We have our first founder event with a lot of amazing founders next week on Tuesday, and we're expecting a really awesome turnout. And yeah, just reach out with any questions. It's latinaventurestudents@gmail.com, and we'll get everything squared away.
Amazing. Well, thank you very much, Ashley. Thank you, Joanna, for joining us tonight. For everyone watching, this is RBL1 Live, and come back and join us on Tuesdays and Thursdays. We have more founders and VCs coming, sharing their story of what's happening in the space. So stay tuned, and thanks again for joining us, both of you.
Gracias.